Ave Maris Stella.
Hello and welcome back to Vatican II in a Year. This is your host, Father Matthew Schneider. I am a priest with the Legionaries of Christ and a theology professor. This is a podcast on the StarQuest production network at sqpn.com. Today we're on day 340 and we're covering Gaudium says 62 on culture is often contrary to doctrine. If you want to follow along, we have a reading plan and more details at sqpn.com/Vatican or frmatthewlc.com/Vatican. Yesterday, we spoke about should encourage a growth in knowledge and leisure, remembering these find their ultimate meaning in God. Today, we are going to conclude Chapter 2, the proper development of culture. And then, obviously, based on that, we're also going to conclude Section 3, some more urgent duties of Christians in regard to culture. Tomorrow we'll start Chapter 3, which is on economics. And the summary of today is that culture can be a challenge, but we need to approach and engage so we can present the gospel to our scientific culture. Paragraph 62, which we're covering today, has 6 subparagraphs. We'll read them in 4 parts. A is about how culture sometimes fights against the truth the church presents. B and C, the church supports various arts expressing culture, especially literature. D and E, the gospel should reach our conditions and culture, including our scientific age. And then F, theology should engage other sciences, and we need lay theologians. So A, again, is about culture sometimes fights against the truth that the church presents. Right? Obviously, as Catholics, we believe that the Catholic Church has the fullness of the truth. Other people have parts of the truth, and other things go in opposition to the truth. So let's read 62a. Although the church has contributed much to the development of culture, experience shows that, for circumstantial reasons, it is sometimes difficult to harmonize culture with Christian teaching. These difficulties do not necessarily harm the life of faith. Rather, they can stimulate the mind to a deeper and more accurate understanding of the faith. The recent studies and findings of science, history, and philosophy raise new questions, which affect life and which demand new theological investigations. Furthermore, theologians, within their requirements and methods proper to theology, are invited to seek continually for more stable ways of communicating doctrine to the men of their times. For the deposit of faith, the truths are one thing, and the manner in which they are enunciated, in the same meaning and understanding, is another. In pastoral care, sufficient use should be made not only of those theological principles, but also the finding of secular sciences, especially of psychology and sociology, so that the faithful may be brought to a more adequate and mature life of faith. This paragraph begins by noting how much the church has contributed to culture. We can see this in how much of the art comes from the church, how much of science really originates with the church and people sponsored by the church doing these investigations. And it's really amazing if you look back at it. We have all this that came from this Christian culture. We have hospitals that came from a Christian culture and things like that. Obviously, it took time and developed, and not all of them are fully Christian now, science or hospitals and things like that. But the ones we have now developed from a Christian culture. Now we have the challenge of how to harmonize these with the Christianity and these elements of culture. Often, we need a deeper understanding of faith to be able to point out where they are correct or incorrect in culture. It's not just a superficial third-grade understanding of faith. Hopefully, by the time you've gotten this far in this podcast, you are beyond that level. And then we need theology to investigate and respond to new discoveries. How do we understand things? How does the world understand things? I know, for example, this semester, the fall semester of 2025, I taught a class on creation and eschatology, so the beginning and end. And in the section on creation, we had a week dedicated to discussing what was the historical Adam. And a lot of that was dedicated to looking at science and different theologians and philosophers analyzing the scientific data. That is the kind of thing I think that is being asked here, where we say, okay, science is saying this about human development, So how can we understand that in light of Revelation, where we know that there is a historical Adam and Eve? And then we need to understand what is key and what can we change based on science. Because when we look at that, we have to say, okay, the exact age of Adam, which if you calculate out like 6,000 BC or something, or 6,000, I forget if it's 6,000 years ago or 6,000 BC off the top of my head. But if we say, oh, it's 50,000 or 100,000, 200,000, 500,000 years ago, those are the kind of ranges given by different authors we looked at, based on different criteria. Those are the kind of things where we can say, okay, the exact age of Adam is not an essential thing. But the fact that we get original sin from Adam is essential to our faith, so there needs to be one common ancestor. And then finally, it talks about how pastoral care should take up sciences like psychology, because oftentimes, how we can help people out, we can learn a lot in taking like psychology or sociology. I've taken a few classes in those two subjects. I'm going too long today. I just looked at the clock. Let's go on to B and C. The church supports various arts, expressing culture, expressing literature. B is just literature, C is all the other arts. Let's read it. 62b. Literature and the arts are also, in their own way, of great importance to the life of the church. They strive to make known the proper nature of man, his problems and his experiences in trying to know and perfect both himself and the world. They have much to do with the revealing man's place in history and in the world, with illustrating the miseries and joys, the needs and strengths of man, and with foreshadowing a better life for him. Thus, they are able to evaluate human life, expressed in multifold forms according to various times and regions. C. Efforts must be made so that those who foster these arts feel that the church recognizes their activity, and so that, enjoying orderly liberty, they may initiate more friendly relations with the Christian community. The church acknowledges also new forms of art, which are adapted to our age and in keeping with the characteristics of various nations and regions. They may be brought into the sanctuary since they raise the mind to God, once the manner of expression is adapted and they are conformed to liturgical requirements. We start here with this idea literature is so valuable. In the Legion, in my own community, we do an associate's degree of humanities first after our division because we value literature and these other arts that much, and history and languages as well. And these help us understand ourselves in the world, shows our place in the world. They elevate human life. When I was younger, I really didn't like this idea of understanding humankind through fiction, but as I've gotten older, I've actually learned to appreciate it. And then the church should support fostering various arts. Art itself is good, and different ones are going to have different aspects, universal or particular, different cultures. And sometimes this can be connected to Christianity. Sometimes it is just abstract art or it is anti-Christian art, but oftentimes it can be adapted to Christianity. And then we have to judge what can be used for devotional art, what can be used for the liturgy and things like that. I find it very beautiful to see like images of Mary from other cultures, other than, our Western kind of culture. I have an image of the Immaculate Heart in my room, and Mary looks kind of Irish or something like that in that image. But I also appreciate when they have images of Mary where she looks African or Asian or things like that, because Mary is for every culture. Moving on to the next section, D and E, they talk about the gospel should reach our condition and culture, including our scientific age. 62D. Thus the knowledge of God is better manifested, and the preaching of the gospel becomes clearer to human intelligence, and shows itself to be relevant to man's actual conditions of life. E. May the faithful, therefore, live in very close union with the other men of their time, and may they strive to understand perfectly their way of thinking and judging as expressed in their culture. Let them blend new sciences and theories and the understanding of the most recent discoveries of Christian morality and the teaching of Christian doctrine, so that their religious culture and the morality may keep pace with scientific knowledge and with the constantly progressing technology. Thus, they will be able to interpret and evaluate all things in a truly Christian spirit. The gospel of Jesus Christ is made for every setting of life. One of the things you learn in doing homiletics and preaching is that the homilies are meant for the audience, not just generally. if I'm preaching to elementary school students, to a general parish, or to a seminary, I am going to give a different homily on the same topic or on the same readings. I might even have a different topic because there's things that the elementary school students need to hear that the seminarians already know, and it would just be boring repetition. But there are things that the seminarians need to apply to their lives that might go whoosh right over the head of a lot of other audiences. We need to be aware of our time and live with the people of our time and place. And this includes science and technology. We live in a society that is very focused on that. And so we need to be able to preach to people who are very involved, very knowledgeable on science and technology. For example, I was just, my older phone is dying, and I was just contacting, just before I actually recorded this, I was contacting some people to ask about which phones are the better ones for me based on a few things for a newer phone, because my phone's like, 5 generations back of the current top model of that series. So it's not like I'm trying to live poverty and it's really stopped working. It just turns off randomly. Anyways, don't want to get too into myself. Let's move on to the last subparagraph J, which is F. And the topic is theology should engage other sciences and we need lay theologians. 62F. Let those who teach theology in seminaries and universities strive to collaborate with men versed in the other sciences through a share of their resources and points of view. Theological inquiry should pursue a profound understanding of revealed truth. At the same time, it should not neglect close contact with its own time, that it may be able to help those men skilled in various disciplines to attain a better understanding of the faith. This common effort will greatly aid the formation of priests who will be able to present our contemporaries the doctrine of the church concerning God, man, and the world, in a manner more adapted to them so that they may receive it more willingly. Furthermore, it is to be hoped that many of the laity will receive a sufficient formation in the sacred sciences, and that some will dedicate themselves professionally to those studies, developing and deepening by their own labors. In order that they may fulfill their function, let it be recognized that all the faithful, whether clerics or laity, possess a lawful freedom of inquiry, freedom of thought, and expressing their mind with humility and fortitude in those matters which they enjoy competence. This subparagraph really starts speaking right to me, right? It says, those who teach theology in seminaries do this. I'm like, that's me. And so we need to engage these new sciences. This often seems abstract when it's described here, but I want to give you a few examples of things that bring in the new sciences in things I have actually taught in seminaries. One of the most obvious areas is bioethics, where we talk about all kinds of different procedures from, organ donation, blood transfusion, different ways of making babies or helping people with infertility and things like that. And I need to know all this kind of biology, medicine stuff to know that. When I teach Introduction to Scripture, I have a few lectures on archaeology because I think it's important to use archaeology to help us understand what life was like at the time of Jesus and what actual structures or actual artwork existed there that we have found in archaeological digs. And then a little less so, but in social doctrine, so to ethics on economics and politics and things like that, we do use some of the social sciences. Theology should be able to address the issues of time and place. There is a theoretical part of theology, that's the main part, but it's also practical and applied to this particular place. Finally, this subparagraph notes the idea that we need to train laity in theology, and I think that that's a good thing. I think it's good to have laity trained in theology. One thing that I think is very beautiful from the council is that almost every Catholic university has 1, 2, 3 mandatory theology classes. And this helps people get theology beyond just their 3rd grade or 5th grade level, which we often have people stay at if they don't have further formation. And then from those, some will dedicate their life full time. And it's great to work with them, honestly. I love working with lay theologians in general. I have a lot of good relationships with them. And that's a wonderful thing to see in the church today. This concludes today. Thank you for listening to this episode of Vatican II in a Year. This is a listener-supported podcast, and you can donate to help StarQuest produce it, another great podcast, at sqpn.com/give. You can give one-time monthly to join the StarQuest Patreon. Tomorrow, we're going to continue with the next paragraph of Gaudium et Spes. That's paragraph 63 on economics as an important area of human endeavor. And it starts chapter 3, economic and social life. If you're following the reading plan, you'll note that I put the Canadian or British spelling of endeavor. My American Word document flashed as a spell check error. Well, it's not. It's correct if you're American or British. I am both Canadian and American, so I can use either one. So please join us then to learn more about Vatican II, which can provide a blueprint for the Catholic Church. If you want more information on the podcast, like playlists and a reading plan, go to sqpn.com/Vatican, frmatthewlc.com/Vatican, or Vatican SQPN on Facebook and X. We've also set up an email for questions and comments. That's Vatican, the number 2, at sqpn.com. And my own website, frmatthewlc.com, has a contact form.